Alright, Blaster Peeps, moving on to our next video for the evening. I've been getting a lot of questions in regards to pistons jamming, pre-engaging. See if we can get a better view here. So we'll quickly run through that. I have run through it in the past, but we'll touch on it again. I've been getting a few PMs, so we'll clarify some issues that everyone seems to be having. So first things first, angle of engagement. Gone through some tips on how to do it. It's pretty straightforward. Marking the back of your box where the piston normally would sit. I haven't got a full setup here. As you can see, I don't have a head, so it's really hard. Once we mark the back of the box, then we get a better view. Where are we? There we go. Mark the back of the box where the piston would normally sit. Then remove the gear through its rotation until we get a really good contact. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be at 12 o'clock. As you can see with this, 12 o'clock's not the ideal position. Still see a little bit of a gap. So we go forward a bit. And as soon as that first tooth right there has maximum contact with the pickup tooth, then that's the angle that we need to space that piston to the cylinder head. How we get the measurement is once you mark the back of the box where the piston would normally sit and then adjust your angle of engagement, you put another mark on the back of the box, and then that'll be the distance that you need to space this piston out from the head. Once you do that, then you have to make way for the teeth on this piston. So this one is an SHS 14 tooth piston rack or ladder, so that number 15 tooth's already been ground out from factory, which saves us a little bit of grinding work. But we also may have to grind that second tooth here, because as it would sit with a good AOE, we don't get good engagement through that, or actually we get that tooth fouling. So we normally would have to grind top half of that tooth down, or put a little bit of a chamfer on it just so it can clear the first tooth at its stationary position, like so. So that clearly fouls there. If our angle of engagement was a little bit further, it would foul a lot more. So once we grind that second tooth down to allow the first tooth of the sector gear to pass and the second tooth to pass, then it would start its rotation and pull the piston back. Now, the questions I've been getting lately is fouling from the last tooth of the piston to the last tooth of the sector gear, and that is because people are saying that the piston is too long. They are trying to change the types of pistons they're using, trying to change a lot of things, which they may be able to find a combination that works where the gear would clear that piston really well. But usually I find just grinding down half of that tooth there allows for the last tooth to go through and clear, which is the problem that we had with Anthony's Vector. So we rectified that. Now, with that said, always be aware that if you grind down, because this is a full tooth, as we've come through, it's still got full contact there. If we grind down half the tooth, then it actually misses contact at that point. If you mimic it missing contact and the piston moves forward at that point, then as the tooth lets go of contact and the piston moves forward, it'll actually foul on the second last piston as well. So just like we've done with the first two teeth, where we've totally taken off the first tooth and ground down half of the second tooth, you have to mirror that with the last tooth and the second last tooth. So grind down half of that tooth there and then grind down probably a third of the tooth there, just so you don't get the piston fouling on the last tooth of the sector. So that's pretty straightforward. People are getting a few engagement issues with that. Now, something a little bit more complicated. We'll get rid of that. Getting a bulk load of PMs, messages, questions on what I run. So there's your V2 tappet plate. This is a Wells nozzle. I actually don't run a Wells nozzle. I run a normal V2 AEG nozzle, which is 21.4 millimeters long. This Wells nozzle should be recessed to allow, if I can get that off. I've super glued it on, which is something I normally would do and recommend. Here we go. So that Wells nozzle is recessed down to allow the rubber tip to sit on there flush. Now with my V2 AEG nozzle, I don't do that. Let's come back a bit more. Give me a bit more room. It's a bit better. I leave that as one complete shaft. I don't machine that down. Why do I do that? Is because when I put the rubber nozzle back over the tip, it actually swells, which makes the outer diameter bigger. If I make the outer diameter bigger, because of the T-piece that I use, I'll drop that nozzle. Bear with me for a second, guys. Drop the nozzle underneath my couch. Alright, we're back on track. So because of the T-piece I choose to use, which is a Fighting Bro T-piece, that is a loose fit. Not necessarily, it doesn't need to be a tight fit, because your sealing surfaces are all the way down in there. See that second ring down inside there? That's where your nozzle seats, and that is your sealing surface for it, which is past the feed pipe. I just like the fact that it's a tight fit in there, and it saves, with a bit of movement, saves movement in this nozzle to cylinder head, which I've had, who was it? I think it was Dan over at Gel Blaster Wars. His nozzle moved within his tappet plate and cylinder head, which I have one here, do I? Yep, certainly do. How about we get a complete unit here? There's a complete unit from an old Wells that I had. So his nozzle was moving up and down, and just like moving a metal coat hanger, the more up and down movement you get, it creates heat, and it actually snapped the little tip off his head because we had a little bit of movement. Well, because of two reasons. One, we had a little bit of movement in his T-piece, which allowed for the nozzle to move up and down. And two, there's a tappet modification that I highly recommend when you change to a V2 cylinder style, which I recommend using these bad boys. Get a wider view here. I like using the single piece. The reason being is that you take this out of consideration in regards to, is there an air leak here? Yeah, you can buy double O-ring cylinder heads, which are great, which will do the piece, which will do the job. But this is one piece, 100% guaranteed not to leak. That's just one less thing I've got to worry about in all the calculations of putting a blaster together. So another issue that he came across was, if if you have a look, if we can get a good lighting, where is it? There's a little gap that happens between the nozzle and the tappet plate, because the cylinder is a little bit thicker than the distance from this bottom piece of the tappet plate to the nozzle. So as it moves back and forth, it actually fouls on the bottom of that cylinder. So what we do is we groove out that section there, only just enough for it to slide. So mark the front of your cylinder there, and then run it through its travel, mark it again, and then just groove out that little section there. That allows for the tappet plate to sit in the same position without getting fouled on the cylinder, and it saves the tappet plate from moving up and down like so. Also, I always super glue my nozzles to the tappet plate, so there is none of that movement. So effectively that up and down movement of that tappet plate transfers into the nozzle, which then transfers into the little tip on the cylinder, and by it moving up and down a lot, you end up snapping the end of it. So we rectify that situation. Use a AEG style nozzle. I use the Fighting Bro T-piece. Now this is a balancing act. What I mean by that is we need to ensure that the nozzle moves back far enough to allow a gel to feed into the feed pipe. So there's enough gap for a gel to slide down inside there. But we also need to ensure that the tappet plate and nozzle moves forward enough to seal up against that sealing surface inside there. So there are a lot of people who will do a few things. So they'll get a longer nozzle, or they'll move their rubber tip forward a couple mil, like so. So they got a little bit of a gap, which solves their issue in regards to sealing up against the sealing surface of the T-piece that they choose to use. But where their issue then arises is when the tappet plate moves back to its resting position to allow gel to feed, the nozzle, if we can imagine that's inside there, doesn't move far enough back, and then the gel balls don't drop inside the T-piece, and when the nozzle comes back forward, there's not a gel ball there, so it doesn't fire anything because your gel balls are just getting jammed. Sometimes they get all mashed up inside if there's enough pressure. If you're using bad gels as well, you get confetti inside, and then when it does come back, some gel balls will fall in, some gel ball bits will fall inside your T-piece, and then it'll push it forward, and then you're firing out confetti. So that is always a bad idea. Yes, that fixes your seal up against a T-piece. No, it doesn't. But it then affects. It then affects your feet. It gives you a feeding issue because it's not moving back far enough to allow gel to drop in. So if that's a no-no, using a longer nozzle piece is a no-no. What is the fix? Like, how do you get the nozzle to travel forward enough to seal up against the sealing surface of your T-piece, but still allow it to travel back far enough to allow a gel ball to drop into your feed tube, and then allow this nozzle to then push it forward and fire it out the barrel? The answer, my friends, is tappet thickness. So I've never come across an issue where the tappet plate doesn't move back far enough. So if we can still utilize that travel from there to there, all we need to modify is the travel from the rest, or from the we just need to modify the forward travel to the ceiling piece. And how we do that, it's only ever a mil or two, is by shaving the front of that tappet plate. If we can shave the front of that tappet plate by a mil and a half, 2 mil max, you will still be able to keep the backward travel to allow gel to feed, but then modify the forward travel by a mil or two so that it moves forward just enough for it to seal up against that sealing surface. It only needs to be a mil or two. I find that shaving it down, see how there's that little ridge where the T-piece sits? So you got that forward ridge there. Shaving it down up until that point is perfect. It will always seal up against this style of T-piece. I've used it in every single one of my V2 builds. Used it in Gen 9s. I've used it in, what am I using it in now? In the SLR receivers, APS gearboxes, everything like that. Side note with the APS gearbox, because it's got this little lip that usually recesses into a V2 style gearbox, the APS hole is a little bit smaller. You just got to widen that hole to accept this lip, so it recesses right up against the gearbox and holds that in place. So V2 style gearbox, V2 style tapper plate, AEG nozzle. This is a Wells nozzle. Don't use a Wells nozzle. AEG nozzle, 21.4 mil. This is what I measured it without the rubber nub. Fighting Bro T-piece. Front of the tappet plate shaved down to allow it to seal up against the sealing surface of that Fighting Bro T-piece, and you shouldn't have any issues. Also, return spring. Take off a couple coils on either side of it. I usually take a couple coils off the front. So I cut the 2 coils that are bent down, cut that off, and then bend up another 2. That allows extra pressure. It pushes the rubber nozzle, rubber tip onto that sealing surface of your T-piece a little bit more, which compresses the nozzle and creates a better seal. How do you check for air seal before you start putting it together, so you're not pulling it apart, putting it together, pulling it apart, pulling it together a million times? Put your setup inside the gearbox. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, guys. Now I'll switch his camera around. There we go. So how do you check your seal? How I do it is I just drop it into the gearbox. I actually do put the spring on there. So this tapper plate nozzle is as forward as it possibly can be. I then push my T-piece up against the gearbox, put my finger, cover the hole, the hole in the back of the nozzle, and just blow through the front of it. It should have 0 air leak going through the feed tube. If you're able to do that, you've mimicked how everything would sit in the box. You can go through and put your cylinder head, do the same test. It's just a bit harder with the cylinder head. You've got to put your finger up into the cylinder itself and block the hole at the back of the head. That'll then test the seal between tapper plate, nozzle, and T-piece, the nozzle seal, and the cylinder head as well. And just ensure that there is no air pressure loss through your feeding. Also, how you can see if they've got enough gap for a gel to drop inside here. Just take your return spring off, drop a gel inside there, move your tappet plate through its cycle. If the gel ball drops inside your T-piece, you've got enough room. It'll feed every time. That's about all I got for you in regards to that. I'm pretty sure I covered them all. I've seen a couple questions. Let's see what we got. Okay, John, what about an ACR J10? That, my friend, is a curveball. Yes, the ACR J10 uses the Gen 9 T-piece, which has a kick in it. In the process of trying to work out what a good T-piece combination for that is, they are also pretty flimsy in straight out of the box in regards to T-pieces. They break all the time. I will have some information in regards to the ACR J10s hopefully tomorrow. I've got some ideas that I've been throwing around and been talking to other techs about as well. And yeah, hopefully we can have a question, can have an answer for you ASAP. Mr. Josh, the nylon Gen 10s will also fit a Wells. Nylon Gen 10s will also fit a Wells. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to touch on. So, because I used this T-piece, I was able to change my Wells for a Gen 8 style mag. How was I able to do that? Well, first of all, changing your mag terminals, they're different, so that's number one. Secondly, your mag release nub, the little locking nub that holds the mag in, I had to shave that down, probably had to shave half of it off, just so the mag holding hole on the actual mag clipped into the mag release. And I had to shave this feed tube down, or machine it down. I do believe it was 32, no, not 30, 32 mil. No, that sounds a little bit much. Let's go back again. So 1.3 centimeters off the bottom to allocate for the mag port for the feed tube to be bigger. Go away. So, and that's all I had to do to run a Gen 8 style mag into my V2 style gearboxes and receiver. I was lucky enough that the receiver didn't need any. I always look forward to your guys' feedback, point me in the right direction just so I can offer you more information, more relevant information, and deliver it more confidently, and deliver it so that you guys would want to watch all my videos. Oh, Darren, so tap it moving in the nozzle slot, once shave it down, glue it. I use Loctite 406, and that is, so I glue the nozzle to the tappet plate, so that stops it from moving up and down. I also do not shave down my AEG style nozzle because I use the rubber nub on the end of my nozzle to securely snugly fit in my T-piece. As you can see here, there's movement between the nozzle and T-piece. By not shaving that down and having the little rubber tip swell a little bit, it keeps that snugly in the T-piece, so it runs true. And that's how I stop this from pulling off the tappet plate. So a little bit of glue and then a little bit of support on the front of it, and it runs true for me every single time. I did come across an issue where my nozzle was coming off my tappet plate even though I was gluing it down. I believe that was because I didn't have any front support for my T-piece, and also because my tappet plate was fouling at the bottom of my cylinder. So by shaving down the tappet plate, like I explained before, by shaving down the tappet plate, just cycle, well, where are you? Come on now. There we go. Just cycle your tappet plate through its, so mark the front of your cylinder, cycle the tapper plate through its cycle, or move the tapper plate through its cycle, mark it at its furthest point. Once you have those two marks, then just groove that section out there just enough to clear the bottom of that cylinder so that it doesn't foul, because if the cylinder pushes up against the bottom of the tapper plate, then the tapper plate would want to move down, disconnecting itself from the tapper plate and the nozzle. And that's how I stopped the nozzle from coming away from the tapper plate. Those three fixes, and it's very reliable for me. I'm pushing this setup through a 55 rounds a second DSG, so you can imagine how quick this nozzle and tapper plate move between over the cylinder, through the gearbox, and in through this T-piece. And ever since I did those three things, I haven't had an issue with it. So yeah, any other questions, guys, by all means PM me. Post the questions up on these videos, like it, subscribe it, share it, do all that jazz, and we'll keep on throwing some information your way. If you PM me with questions, I'll try and make as many videos as I possibly can, just so we can share the information around with the community. If I come across any really good tips and tricks, I'll by all means more than happy to share it with you guys. Yeah, we'll start building up some information on these gel blasters and start getting some reliable high-end gel blasters out on the field. Thank you very much, guys.